Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is December 17th, and we are here today to offer you an outreach and growth webinar from the MSI on backup as a service and disaster recovery as a service. My name's Carrie Davey. I am the STS Communications Manager. I'm joined here in the Capgemini studios with Neil Pierce, the Outreach and Growth Manager, as well as Larry Mercadell from Tdhe. We're joined on the phone by Connor and Ron from Atos, who are going to give us the rundown on backup and disaster recovery as a service. With that, I will hand it over to Neil and move on to our first slide.
Thank you, Carrie, and thank you for all the speakers, and especially those who are participating to listen about data center services, backup as a service, and disaster recovery as a service. I want to thank Ron putting their section together, but I also want to point out this is the first time we've included one of our current customers to talk to us a little bit about their experience with this particular service. So this is something new that we're starting in our outreach and growth webinars. Each month, if you've been here before, we feature a particular group or service offering. We send emails in advance, and then we conduct this webinar. This is the first time though, so I appreciate Larry coming down from Tdhe, and I'll tell you a little bit more about him and his organization as we go along. Afterwards, I'll speak a little bit about the external portal, and Carrie will wrap it up for featured service offering of the month and subscriptions later. So with that, I'd like to introduce Connor Gannett and Ron Jones from Atos, here to talk about backup as a service and DR as a service.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you, Carrie, and thank you for everybody joining today. My name is Connor Gannett. I am the sales executive with Atos. We manage the state data center here, both in Austin and in San Angelo. We do a lot of other services for the state. So I appreciate everybody jumping in today to learn a little bit about backup as a service and disaster recovery as a service. I'm joined today by Ron Jones, one of our architects who actually developed the solution several years ago and has helped out many of our customers implement this in their organizations, and he'll be helping going through the solution today. Feel free to, during this presentation in the chat, type up any questions, and we'll take pauses, Carrie, if you see any that are popping up at a time where it makes sense to answer them. Thank you very much. You go to the next slide, Neil. So I'll hand over to Ron to kind of give a general overview of data protection in the data center.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Ron Jones. I'm an enterprise architect with Atos, and I did develop this solution about 4 years ago or so. And we do have our first customer that actually helped us design it and go through the proof of concept and everything like that. So it's good to have his perspective on what he's seen in the years that have passed since we first developed it. So with that, I'll kind of go into some of the details that we use in the offering. The core of the offering for both backup as a service and disaster recovery as a service is the Dell EMC Data Protection Suite, which includes primarily the Avamar backup tool, which is tapeless, and the data domain, which gives us the dedupe compression ratio, which is absolutely fantastic in the environment that we use. So with that said, we'll kind of go into the challenges that we face and ultimately the solution that we came up with, and we'll go into the benefits and some of the development methodologies. So back in 2015, 2014, we were faced with a challenge of how do we provide consolidated and regional remote locations with an enterprise tool that we use here in our consolidated data centers, which is the Austin data center and the San Angelo data center, where we've had large capital investments and enterprise tools. We're up to a lot of I guess the best way to say it is we meet a lot of regulatory requirements within the program. And on top of that, we have our partners, AWS and Azure, and some of that was based on how do we capture point-in-time recoveries, how do we handle RPO for disaster recovery, but we'll get into that in a moment. But ultimately, I mean, how can we provide an enterprise solution that we provide in the data center out in remote locations? Now, we do provide that for the state agencies and their remote, what we call them legacy data centers, where we do utilize this solution. So when we first came to TDHCA, the Texas Housing and Community Affairs, this solution was to address their need to have a disaster recovery solution that's actually better than that what they currently had used. So with that said, we have we use the Dell EMC data protection suite. Data is encrypted, it's deduped, in transit and at rest. And a lot of the benefits around there are, again, it's a secure, expandable solution. It reduces the expenses for data protection because we can dedupe that data and save quite a bit on actual storage of that data and the consolidated data centers. It helps us with rapid deployment. So with that said, can we go to the next slide? We'll go right into the backup as a service. So the backup as a service, again, it goes into how do we handle the regional and remote locations? How do we offer that enterprise solution that provides the point-in-time recovery options? How do we offer that solution that provides that capability? So again, we utilize the Dell Data Protection Suite. Data is always protected in the environment. It's optimized for secure network configuration. Again, it's data stored to disk. There's no media. We don't have to offload media. There's none of that. So we can have version controls, local. We can have data. Once data is backed up from your remote location to our consolidated data centers, it is then replicated on our back end for an offsite copy to our alternate data center. So if your closest site is the Austin data center, you can rest assured that your copy of data, your backup, will also be copied offsite in the alternate data center, and vice versa. If your location is closer to San Angelo, then you will have an offsite copy in Austin. So in essence, you have two copies of your backup data at all times, as well as point-in-time recovery, how often you need to, your retention ratios, what are those? So we work with you. We'll come into your environment. We'll do an assessment. We'll take your current and existing retention policies, and we'll bake that into your solution because that's based on your business needs, your business drivers, and we base that solution on that. When we're looking at disaster recovery for this, we support all classes for that. Again, I'll get into that a little bit more when we get into the disaster recovery, but it's just good to know that we have the ability to replicate your data offsite in a multitude of ways, depending on the disaster recovery that you've chosen. With that here, just want to make sure I'm touching on everything. Yeah, so that's good. I believe we can go, unless we have any questions, we can go right into the disaster recovery.
Okay, for those of you who joined after the initial announcement, if you have questions, feel free to pop those into the chat window at any time. You can send those out to everyone or just to me, Carrie, the host. You also have the option to unmute yourself, and you can use the hand icon to let us know if you have a question you'd like to ask our presenters yourself. You don't have any questions so far, so I will go ahead and move you forward.
Ron, I'll get started with one question here for the backup as a service. What are the network requirements to become a good candidate for this?
Yeah, so obviously we would need a connection from the customer's remote site to our data centers, and that's done typically by connecting to DIR's MPLS network, and there are alternate choices if that's an issue, but in essence, We would connect from the customer's remote site to DIR's MPLS network into our data center. We would create what's referred to as a VRF and then have VLANs. We would, in essence, create a network environment in the Austin data center as well as the San Angelo data center for that customer so that they actually have an environment pre-set up for them in each of the data centers. And that goes into the network connectivity requirements from their site to our site and vice versa for when we need to restore data and as well. And that's a valid question. I'm glad you asked that.
Thank you.
Okay, so disaster recovery. Now, this was the catalyst that really brought in TDHCA. Larry, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that was why you guys were really looking at this. And we were toying with different scenarios on how we could provide an enterprise disaster recovery service for them. And ultimately, it was determined that we needed to utilize our backup as a service component that we offer here in the data centers, and we can offer out to agencies or entities that aren't part of the program as well, and utilize that suite, the Dell EMC data protection suite, as the primary core of the solution that provides you that capability. With that, it allows you to be able to utilize all of the different disaster recovery classes that are supported within the STS program. And we will get into that in a little bit here in our next few slides, where we can determine, depending on your RPO, RTO requirements, where that resides, what requirements you would need, etc. But in essence, if you were to declare a disaster in your remote back office or your data center, wherever you happen to be, we would then, depending on your specific disaster recovery classification that you chose, we have the ability to stand up an environment in the Austin data center and or the San Angelo data center and bring up your environment here on either a VMware platform or power system platform. Primarily, it is based on VMware hypervisor. So we support all of the Windows and Linux versions that are currently under the program's supported umbrella. And that's quite extensive, and we can always provide people that list if they want to take a look at that. And with that, we would be able to bring your environment up within those RPO, RTO parameters and have an environment up and running for you to be able to utilize in the event of an actual disaster recovery. Keep in mind that the data that's being backed up is done through Dell EMC Data Protection Suite. It's encrypted, it's deduped on site when it comes here. We dedupe the data for retention purposes, as well as to reduce the size of it. And then an offsite copy is copied to the alternate data center. Let's see, I want to make sure I cover all of the nitty-gritty details that are really benefits of this service. One of the best components of this service is the fact that DIR, the program, has invested in this infrastructure and has invested in this capability that if an individual entity tried to do would be quite expensive. And it is what we utilize in the program today. So we're basically taking that service that we utilize for large agencies, large entities, and provide that out for any size customer that's able to procure these services. I think that, unless there's any questions, let me make sure. Yeah, I mean, there's some of this stuff, it's modern services that we're using. The fact that we don't have tape backups, that Avamar as the backup tool within the data protection suite does not require that backup be stored on the tape media. We store our offsite, data within our own data centers. We don't have to transport it to like Iron Mountain or something like that. So that is always a benefit. We also have the ability to restore your data on your location. So if, for instance, you had to restore some files, that would be just simply having your authorized people contact our ticketing system, and we would get the appropriate services and operational personnel involved, and we would restore those files on in your location. So that's something else I think I overlooked when I originally was talking about the backup as a service, but definitely something I wanted to make sure I covered is that we back up and we restore for you within a pretty reasonable amount of time for such a large enterprise offering. And I think that would probably be it for this slide. Now we're getting into the specific disaster recovery classes. So DR class 1, you look at the requirements of RTO, RPO. We're talking about an RPO of 6 hours and 72 hours for an RTO. And basically for a class 1 would require you to have a target environment. So target servers, obviously for any solution that you request in either a backup or a disaster recovery, you're going to have a network configured in this environment for you. But you would have a target environment. The disaster recovery servers would already be there, and the storage would be stored on our LUNs. And another important thing is that this is for a production environment primarily. Dev test typically wouldn't pay for class 1 on a dev test. That's nothing out of the ordinary there.
Hey, Ron, could you
Hi.
just, and I'm not sure if you did on the previous slide, I'm afraid to try to look at it without changing what I'm displaying. Did you already explain RTO and RPO and what those stand for?
No, I did not. So yeah, recovery point objective is typically the time that you need to have your environment back up and running before potential loss of data. Now the RTO is the absolute last time where critical operations could break the your environment. So hope that helped a little.
Sure, and I did actually get a question. So Lonnie asks, are there any specific hardware requirements on the client side? And I'm not sure if Lonnie, if you're asking about backup or disaster recovery, or if it matters.
Yeah, so and that's a good question. So as far as hardware, it's not so much the hardware as much as the OS that runs on the hardware. We need the OS needs to be at a version that's supported within the STS program, because those are basically that's basically the criteria that we need to make sure that our tools work on. And typically, the hardware would be secondary to that. So our primary requirement for a customer to come on board is that they were utilizing the appropriate OSs. And if I'm not mistaken, and Larry may recall this, for Tdhe, there were a couple of servers that they either let's see, they got rid of, or they had to upgrade their OS. So that's not uncommon, but that's the requirement.
Yeah, I think we had to upgrade or switch from Solaris x86. And then we had a couple of other Linux versions where we ended up migrating those to Red Hat Linux.
Yeah. But that's the primary. Will it meet HIPAA, FERPA, and PCI requirements? That is a good question. I know that we do back up environments for other agencies today that do have HIPAA and FERPA and PCI requirements as well. My answer to that is yes, it does meet HIPAA, FERPA, and PCI requirements. Okay. So that goes into DR class 1. That's when you need an environment where you can stand up and be up and running in the fastest time possible. And typically that requires dedicated hardware and dedicated storage already in place for that. There's not any questions. We can go to the next slide. Okay, so now we're talking about DR class 2B, non-consolidated. So this I don't believe existed when I originally created this solution a few years ago, but it does today. So we have an RTO of 14 days, an RPO of 48 hours. So just keep in mind, 14 days is a catastrophe if it's not done up, it's not brought up by that time. But really, your recovery point objective is to have it up before no later than 48 hours. So with this environment, it's basically for non-consolidated host service sources. So target server required and target storage repurposed during a disaster. So basically, it's something that's been referred to as a balanced model. So if you're utilizing dev test, a production and dev test environment, you would repurpose the dev test for a production environment. Obviously, in all of these solutions, it's regular backups of the production environment. And of course, we do that for dev tests as well. Target storage data is replaced in a recovery data. There could be some performance degradation just simply because you're utilizing your dev test environment for a production environment. Those are some of the factors that would have to go into making a determination as to whether or not a DR class 2B would be appropriate for you. And that would be primarily it. Some of the other things that are important to understand are the BUaaS-based recovery, the backup and recovery. Is that something that we utilize in this service for this DR class? And yes, it is. And it's not a replicated storage. So this storage would not be replicated to an alternate site. It's appropriate for all data types. So, any questions on this slide? If not, we can go to the next one. Okay, so DR class 3, RTO of 21 days and RPO of 48 hours. So this is a on-site consolidated data center recovery. So obviously regular backups of your production environment and target server storage. Those are acquired at time of disaster. And I don't know, Larry, is Tdhe still acquire at time of disaster for your DR environment?
Yes, we are.
Yeah, so basically what we do is we guarantee that there will be resources in the consolidated data center, whether it's the Austin data center or it's the San Angelo data center, that will meet your needs, your requirements for disaster recovery. If there's ever a disaster recovery, we would be able to deploy those resources, the servers, the storage. You would already have a network configured there, and we'd be able to build that environment out for you. And some of the components at the bottom there. So yes, we utilize the backup and recovery base service, and it does utilize the strategy of at time of disaster. So you don't have to pay for resources that sit there in this specific DR class. and it's appropriate for all data types as well. One of the important things to understand is that we can back up applications, we can back up databases, we can use Networker, we can utilize a multitude of solutions to ensure that we meet your specific retention requirements as well as frequency of backups. We can back up to the frequencies, all based on your specific business continuity requirements and drivers.
Ron, we did get another question, which is about another acronym. We sure love those here at Shared Technology Services. And the CDC that Ron is talking about is the Consolidated Data Center. So
Yes.
represent either the Austin Data Center, ADC, or the San Angelo Data Center, the SDC.
Yes, and I apologize for that because those are internal slang that we use all the time, but that's exactly right. Yeah, we use that when I should be saying Austin Data Center, San Angelo Data Center for those specific consolidated data center environments. Okay, I think with that, if there's no other questions, can we go to the next slide, please? All right, now we have Larry. So Larry, if you want to talk about TDHCA's experience utilizing this service.
And don't worry, Ron, we asked Larry before we got started whether he'd been having any problems to make sure that he was ready to give a good report. So he's happy and ready.
Great.
Hello, everybody. My name is Larry Mercadell. I'm the Director of Information Systems at the Texas Department of Housing and Affairs. You know, we were one of the we were the pioneering customer for this service, for backup as a service and disaster recovery as a service, beginning in 2015. We have approximately 12 to 15 servers, production servers that we are currently backing up. They range from database, Oracle, and SQL database servers to application servers as far as Exchange, file servers, IIS, and several other different applications. And various versions of Windows from 2008 R2 all the way up to 2016. Red Hat, Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and then Solaris Spark. Prior to going to the backup as a service, disaster recovery as a service through DRaaS, we were using a combination of tapes, going to offsite storage, and a couple of electronic media, some backup devices that we had on site. So what this allowed us to do is kind of offload as far as our own workload during the day, as far as having a couple of employees dedicated to making sure our backups were being completed, checking on backups, to the DRaaS team. We work very closely with them. We can get reports at any point in time. There's a interface that we can go ahead, or a website we can go ahead and log into to check on any backups. And it's really more like having a partner as far as our backups and making sure that they get done, because for the most part, anytime we've had a problem with the backups, we've been notified before there's a problem with the backup from one of the team members over at either Atos or Capgemini. We had a major file server crash in 2016. Several drives failed. We ended up replacing the drives and getting the server back up and running, and then contacted Atos to go ahead and have them, contacted them to get the Avamar client reinstalled and connected to the grid, to the Avamar grid, and then worked with them to go ahead and get the files restored. I believe the restore the files took approximately 12 hours or so from first contacting them to actually getting the files restored. But that file server is about 8 or 9 terabytes. So a lot of getting the files restored was just the time involved of transferring that much data across the WAN connection that we have to the consolidated data center. Now, since we've been a customer, we've had numerous smaller recovery activities where we've needed a file or a folder containing multiple files restored. Most of those activities are always finished within a couple of hours from actually contacting Atos to actually having the file back on the server. And anytime you do those restores, you can either have the file sent back to the original server or sent to any other server that you have an Avamar client on. So some of the benefits that we had at Tdhe, it was 40% savings over our previous provider. We had a drop ship provider for our disaster recovery at that time. So not only was it saving us a significant amount of money, it was also going to provide us with a reduced recovery time. So we were estimating that our recovery time was going to be over 3 weeks before we started with this process, and now it can be up to just a few days. If it's just a restore of information, like I said before, that's just a few hours. But if we actually had a server in their environment, it would take us a few days. We've had enhanced data integrity and security. Covered a lot of that in his previous slides, so I won't go ahead and talk about that. And then it simplified our annual disaster recovery test, providing better and more accurate results. With that, we have an annual disaster recovery test that we do. For us, it's every October, November. We bring up anywhere from 2 to 3 servers in their environment. We're able to test all aspects of recovery and bringing up a server and being able to use it. And therefore, it gives us just better results of how this service will work in the case of a disaster, and we actually really needed to use it.
Excellent. Larry, you covered that really well. Appreciate you coming out again. This is our first customer experience we've had with our outreach and growth webinars, and thanks to you, we'll continue doing these again as long as they can keep up with your style here. Hey, there was a couple things I wanted to ask, and just to reiterate on the backup as a service, and this is also with Ron as well. Very important. These are for servers that are not hosted. They're not currently in the data centers. These are what we're talking about. Backup as a service is really for somebody who's remote in your legacy, your current data center that's not in one of those consolidated data centers. We do the backups. Those backups, as Ron mentioned, are replicated to both data centers. But as you were mentioning, Larry, if there's a file that needs to be restored, you put in a ticket. That file is usually restored same day or very soon. And you mentioned it could be restored where it was or at a different file server location, just so you specify that in the ticket.
Yeah, you can specify it to any server any server that you have that's being backed up that has a current Avamar client on it. Right. You can even work with their team to put the Avamar client on a different server if you needed to go to a server that's not quite on that's not being backed up at that moment either. So
in Tdhe experience, you guys pretty much prioritized your primary, I guess, critical applications to be part of this backup as a service, right?
Yeah, basically, we went through and prioritized all of our critical production servers, whether that be an application server or a database server, and just went ahead and prioritized those servers at the time, just because we didn't have a lot of funding when we were starting this process. But this year we've actually expanded our funding, and we're actually going to be putting all of our production systems into this service over the course of this year.
Excellent. So, I mean, you identified your biggest ones, the most important ones, got them started. And then as I saw some of your DR experiments, or DR exercises, I say experiments, I mean exercises, you've got, from year to year, they change, right? You may do one set of database application, then next year you may do a different part.
Yeah, basically what we'll do as a team, we'll decide what servers we want to go ahead and restore for each backup exercise. For each disaster recovery test exercise. And that can vary. if we introduce a new server, whether that be a new operating system or a new application, a new database version, then we'll go ahead and select one of those servers as one of the disaster recovery test servers that to restore that year. So that way we can make sure that what we're backing up is exactly what we need to back up. What we're restoring is exactly what we need to restore. The disaster recovery test also gives you an opportunity to go ahead and identify any gotchas. Maybe you're not backing up a file or a folder that you need. You're not doing the proper backup technique for that particular set of files, whether it be a database or an application. So it just gives you a chance to test anything out that you've introduced into your environment that's new for that year.
Okay. And then we hear this from other customers. You were the first, and we have others that are doing DRaaS as a service. I'm fumbling the word here. Although backup as a service is required for DR as a service customers, those customers who have been doing those exercises are just amazed that, starting on Monday, you will go through a DR, declaration, and those servers are now being rebuilt and restored in a consolidated data center lab area, a test area, DR area, so that you can reach out and touch them and do your data validations, whatever you go through, the checks and points and balances of what you're following on your DR plan. So it's not just a tabletop experience. You actually go through the whole exercise to test it out.
No, we're actually bringing the server up in y'all's data center. So it's a virtual server. We have complete access to it. We're going ahead and configuring everything we need to configure, whether that be the database or the application. A lot of times we'll go ahead and connect back to our network, just because there'll be other dependencies, whether that be for authentication, if database server having the application server available. But we're able to go ahead and fully test that server to make sure that not only can we bring it up in y'all's environment, but that everything that we need to run on that server is actually going to be able to run in that type of environment.
Right. I do want to also point out that the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs was prominently participated in our promotional video for shared technology services. The URL is there at the bottom. We'll post this along with the recording on the publications in the portal.
I wish we could show it to you. We're trying to figure out ways to display video, but WebEx is not the most friendly. It will make lots of choppiness, and the audio isn't good. So
is it possible to cut and paste that into the comments that everyone can see?
sure, yeah.
Just in case you haven't seen this video in the past, we'll post it there. You can also search on it for, searching DIR Shared Technology Services video on YouTube, and you should be able to find it. It's less than 4 minutes, and it does include Tdhe, and you can now actually put a face to the name here. He's shaking his head. He's got a face for radio like the rest of us, except for Carrie. All right. All right. Let's continue. Are there any questions?
So we did get one question, which he says, you might have answered this already. So Ron and Connor, this one's really for you. How do they get the data to you? Internet or circuit ? So I'm not sure. I assume we're talking about for the backup data, right? And so
Must be referring to the network connectivity from the remote location to and from the consolidated data centers. I would guess that's how there has to be for all the remote locations, there has to be a VLAN setup that ultimately goes through their local switches or routers into DIR's MPLS network and then routed to the consolidated data center. So that traffic, that VLAN traffic would be part of the setup. It would also be part of the assessment of whether or not the service is appropriate or is a good fit for that specific customer in that specific location. But in general, basically anywhere in the state of Texas and outside, as long as they have good a good network connectivity, a good bandwidth for the amount of data that they need to back up and the frequency that they need to back up. It's handled through that. It's not an internet connection from source to target, meaning from your remote location to here and back. That is all a secure connection.
Thanks for that. If anyone else has last minute questions, please put them into our chat window there and we will address them before we close out. But I think we have a few more pieces of information to share with folks, right?
Yeah, well, we're winding down. I want to tell you how to access more information. If you're interested in backup as a service, disaster recovery as a service, or any of the other service offerings that STS provides, please take a look at our external portal. That's posted there in the blue. This is a little screen snapshot of what it looks like. And one of the things I'll point out, that very top box says if you're already an STS customer, it'll take you to the internal portal, which will require you to, if you have those internal portal credentials, that's the place to go. You can put in your service request through the service request catalog and open up a request for service. However, for those of you most likely who have joined this webinar, you probably do not have those internal credentials yet, and you're checking on, services for STS. This is the place to go. If you're an existing customer, but you're not an IT person that has those credentials, then you can also use this portal to get more information. The next slide, as you go through some of the service offerings, and for this example, you'll use the DCS or Data Center Services Infrastructure and Hybrid Cloud, and that'll take you to the next slide where you can decide, oh, I really want to choose either backup as a service because that's what we were talking about today, or disaster recovery as a service. You'll get a little bit more details. And then the next slide shows you that here's how I can get a service offering request submitted. Fill in your contact information in that box on the left. There's a pull down menu of service offerings, and right there the third one says backup as a service, and then there are two more down is disaster recovery as a service. If you're interested in both, please submit two of those separately, and any additional information there would specify, hey, I'm looking for, roughly I'm thinking about adding maybe 10 Windows servers to this backup as a service or DR as a service. But the good thing is once that's submitted, you'll be able to get or someone will reach out and contact you and discuss what your real needs are and how the best fit is for DIR shared technology services. The next thing I want to point out, while you're submitting this, it's a good idea on the next slide here to take a look at some of those contracts. There is a contract that is required, interagency contract or an interlocal contract. That would be everybody who's not a state agency with DIR, and that basically sets up the master agreement with DIR. Then there's the program terms and conditions. As we mentioned, this falls under the data center services. That basically is through email. There is nothing being charged, no commitment at all until we get down to that level 3, and that's where you actually get a solution proposal with a cost estimate. So you can size that, shape that. For example, we're talking about backup as a service. So the more retention you have, it could drive up more storage costs. So it's an idea that makes you say, oh, you know what, do I really need 30 days? Do I want monthly backups, annual backups, that kind of thing? And how long do I want to retain that data? And that helps define what you're actually asking for. Before any of that is executed, you get that proposal, the cost estimate, the timeline, and you actually approve it. So there's a few things I'd like for you to look at, the ILC, for example, the T's and C's. Before we get down to the solution terms, you can start that process while you're getting some information from Shared Technology Services. With that, I'll turn it over to Carrie.
All right, so those of you who have joined us on previous webinars know that we try to do one of these every month. I learned today that Deloitte calls them the flavor of the month. So the flavor of this month was, as you just saw, business or backup as a service and disaster recovery as a service. We're working on a joint project with DIR right now to get the previous webinar recordings for all of these webinars posted on that same YouTube channel where our promotional video is currently hosted. Right now, we're in the phase of going through and adding our closed captioning tracks. So you should soon, before the next one in January with Texas.gov, have access to our entire back catalog of these informative webinars. So like I said, you see here in January, we believe towards the end of January, we will have another introductory webinar. We'll be revisiting Texas.gov with both the application and payment services providers to see what's new in that space for our potential customers. If you received the Outlook invitation to today's call, then that probably means you're already subscribed to our mailing list. If you go to our website, you'll see in the footer, there is a link that would allow you to subscribe if someone forwarded today's message to you, that you can then receive the invitation automatically. It is a little confusing because you might have received the information about the webinar via the newsletters that go out, but that does not necessarily mean you would receive the Outlook invitation. You have to take that one extra step to confirm that you'd like to subscribe, and then you get invited to our fun webinars.
Hey, I wanted to thank you, Carrie. I want to thank our speakers, especially Connor and Ron and Larry here for presenting the backup as a service and DRaaS as a service. And it was, I think the highlight was actually having a customer talk about their experience with this. So if we don't have any questions, Carrie, then
We do not.
Thank everybody's time and attention and enjoy the holidays.
And if you come up with questions after the fact, you see our contact information there on the screen. Feel free to drop us an email at any time. We will, like I said, have the webinars all posted soon, which will also include these decks. So if you'd like to review them, we'll make them available to you shortly.
Thank you. Goodbye.